Suburban dysfunction is supposed to be mundane, all emotionally stunted smiles and keeping up appearances. That's the kind of rot I thought I grew up with. What I didn't realize was that my mother spent 5 long years quietly laundering the sheets after my father slept with my older sister. Pour yourself something strong. The story only goes downhill from here. My sister Sawyer was the kind of beautiful that made people uncomfortable. It wasn't just symmetry or good genetics. It was a weaponized sort of grace. She glided through rooms. She touched people lightly on the arm when she laughed at their terrible jokes. She was the golden child, minted and polished, while I was the rough draft my parents kept in the basement. I'm Chloe. I'm the one who wore heavy eyeliner in middle school and went to a state college while Sawyer went to Yale. I was the cynical observer in the corner of the room, nursing a lukewarm beer while my family performed for whatever audience happened to be in our house that weekend. Our house was a sprawling, sterile monument to my father's success in commercial real estate. It smelled perpetually of Meyer lemon bleach, expensive vanilla candles, and unspoken tension. Everything was white or beige. Walking through the living room felt like walking through a museum where you weren't allowed to breathe too hard on the exhibits. The weirdness started, or at least became visible to me, when Sawyer moved back home. She was 26. She had just broken up with her fiancé, a perfectly nice orthodontist named Greg, who suddenly wasn't fulfilling her potential. That was my mother's phrasing. My mother, Beatrice. Beatrice was a woman held together by hairspray, tension, and a diet consisting entirely of almonds and white wine. When Sawyer moved her boxes back into her old childhood bedroom, the one directly across the hall from my parents' master suite, Beatrice didn't complain. She celebrated. She bought new Egyptian cotton sheets. She filled Sawyer's bathroom with $100 serums. My dad, Asher, was just as thrilled. Asher was a large, affable man. He had a booming laugh and a handshake that could crush rocks. People loved him. He paid for the country club memberships, he sponsored the local Little League, and he looked at his eldest daughter like she was the only bright thing in a dark world. At the time, I thought it was just gross favoritism. I remember a specific Sunday dinner about 3 months after Sawyer moved back. I was visiting from my apartment across town to do laundry and steal groceries. We were sitting around the massive mahogany dining table. Mom was cutting her chicken into microscopic pieces. I was eating in silence. Dad poured Sawyer a 3rd glass of Pinot Noir. His hand lingered on her shoulder. "You're looking tired, sweetheart," he said, his voice dropping into that low, soothing register he usually reserved for talking down anxious clients. "Are you sleeping okay?" Sawyer leaned into his hand. It was a subtle movement, just a fraction of an inch, but it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Just stress, Daddy. The new gallery job is a lot of hours." "You don't have to work," he said. He squeezed her shoulder. "You know I can take care of you." I looked at my mother. Beatrice was staring intently at the salt shaker. Her jaw was clenched so tight the muscle fluttered in her cheek. She didn't look up. She didn't say a word. She just reached for her wine glass and drained it. "I like working," Sawyer purred, finally pulling away from his touch. "But maybe we could take the boat out this weekend, just to clear my head." "Absolutely," Dad said. He beamed. I rolled my eyes. "Are you two going to kiss, or can somebody pass the potatoes?" The silence that hit the room was suffocating. It was heavy, thick, and instantly cold. Dad slowly turned his head to look at me, his affable smile vanishing, replaced by a stare so flat and dead it made my stomach drop. "Excuse me, Chloe," he said quietly. "It was a joke," I muttered, suddenly feeling very small. "You guys are just a lot." "Your sister is going through a difficult transition," Mom snapped, her voice brittle. She still wasn't looking at anyone. "A little empathy wouldn't kill you." Sawyer just smiled at me. It was a slow, pitying smile. "It's okay, Mom. Chloe's always been a little jealous." I shoved my plate away. I didn't stay for dessert. I drove back to my cramped apartment, feeling like I was losing my mind. I convinced myself I was just being a bitter younger sister. I told myself I was projecting my own insecurities onto them. I told myself their dynamic was just a weird, codependent rich people thing. I was an idiot. The clues were everywhere. They were scattered across the pristine hardwood floors like breadcrumbs, the hushed conversations in the kitchen that stopped the second I walked in, the way Sawyer never brought a date home after Greg, the way Dad stopped traveling for work, delegating all his out-of-state site visits to junior partners so he could be home every single night. And then there was the laundry. My mother had a housekeeper who came 3 times a week. Maria did the vacuuming, the dusting, the bathrooms, but Beatrice insisted on doing the laundry herself. She claimed Maria used the wrong detergent, that she ruined the delicates. But I noticed something strange during a random Tuesday visit. I had stopped by to pick up a package that had been delivered to the house. Mom was in the laundry room, the washer running on the heaviest, hottest cycle. I walked in to say hi, and she jumped like she'd been electrocuted. She slammed the lid of the hamper down. She was panting slightly, her eyes wide and panicked. "Jesus, Mom, it's just me," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "You didn't knock," she said, her voice shaking. She ran a hand through her perfectly stiff hair. "The front door was unlocked. What are you doing?" "Just washing Sawyer's sheets." She spilled coffee. I looked at the counter. There was a bottle of industrial stain remover. The strong, chemical smell of it stung my nose. That's a lot of chemicals for coffee. "It's a very light duvet, Chloe," she snapped, recovering her composure. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" I left the package on the counter and walked out. I remember thinking, she's finally cracking. I thought Beatrice was developing OCD. I thought the pressure of maintaining the perfect suburban illusion was driving her to obsessively scrub invisible stains. I didn't know the stains were real. It took another 1.5 years before the blindfold was ripped off. Sawyer was 28 by then. She hadn't moved out. She hadn't dated. She just existed in the house, a beautiful, parasitic fixture. Dad had bought her a brand new Range Rover for her birthday. Mom had bought her a designer watch. I bought her a gift card to a bookstore, which she looked at like it was a dead rat. It was late October. The house was freezing because Mom kept the AC blasting despite the autumn chill. She read somewhere that cold environments preserved skin elasticity. Dad had asked me to come over to help him set up a new smart TV in the den. He was terrible with technology. He could close a $10 million real estate deal in his sleep, but a 2-factor authentication prompt sent him into a rage. I was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, wrestling with the remote. Dad had gone upstairs to take a shower. "I need the Apple ID password," I yelled toward the stairs. "It's in the blue notebook in my desk drawer," he shouted back from the second-floor landing. I groaned, hauling myself off the floor. I walked down the hall to his home office. It was a dark, masculine room. Lots of leather, dark wood, and framed photos of him shaking hands with local politicians. I opened the top drawer of his massive oak desk. No blue notebook. I opened the second drawer. Just dry cleaning receipts and golf tees. I tugged on the bottom drawer. It was stuck. I wiggled it, pulling harder until it popped open with a loud clack. Inside was a mess of tangled charging cords, old flash drives, and an older generation iPad. The screen was cracked in the corner. Beneath it, I saw the corner of a small blue moleskin notebook. I grabbed the notebook and flipped it open, looking for the password. As I did, my elbow brushed the iPad. The screen lit up. There was no passcode on it. It was just open to a home screen. I don't know what made me look. Maybe it was the fact that it was hidden at the bottom of a stuck drawer. Maybe it was my own inherent distrust of my father. Or maybe the universe just decided I had spent enough time in the dark. I tapped the iMessage icon. The most recent conversation was with a contact named H. No last name, just an initial. I stared at the screen. The text bubbles were a mix of blue and gray. H. You left a mark on my hip. B. Asked about it. Dad. Tell her you bumped into the counter. Is she out? H. Grocery store. Then she has book club. Dad. I'm coming to your room. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like I had swallowed a golf ball. I sat down heavily in the leather office chair. The room suddenly felt entirely too hot, the walls pressing in. No. My brain rejected it instantly. No, no, no. It's a mistress. He has a mistress whose name starts with H. Helen. Hannah. Holly. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the tablet. I scrolled up. The messages went back months, years. H. Greg wants to set a date for the wedding. I told him I'm not ready. Dad, you're not marrying him. I won't let some mediocre tooth scraper touch what's mine. Tell him it's over. H. You know B will throw a fit. She already put down a deposit on the florist. Dad, I'll handle Beatrice. You handle Greg. Come downstairs. B. Beatrice. Greg. The orthodontist. My vision blurred. I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to clamp my hand over my mouth. I tasted bile. I kept scrolling. I couldn't stop. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the car was my entire reality, and it was bursting into flames. There were photos. I won't describe them. I can't. They weren't romantic. They were territorial. They were grotesque. It was my sister. It was my father. In the house. In her childhood bedroom. In hotel rooms on business trips she had tagged along on. The timeline stretched back 5 years. 5 years of this. It started right around the time she got engaged to Greg. I sat there in the silence of my father's office. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant rush of water from the upstairs shower. My father was showering, upstairs, right across the hall from my sister's room. I dropped the iPad back into the drawer. It hit the wood with a dull thud. I grabbed the blue notebook, slammed the drawer shut, and stumbled backward. I hit the edge of the bookshelf, knocking a framed photo to the floor. The glass shattered. It was a picture of the 4 of us. Christmas, 3 years ago. Dad had his arm around Sawyer's waist. He pulled her flush against him. Mom was standing a foot away, smiling stiffly. I was on the edge, looking away from the camera. Everything okay down there, Chloe? My father's voice floated down the stairs. It was cheerful, normal. I stared at the broken glass. I couldn't speak. My vocal cords were paralyzed. Chloe? I dropped a picture, I yelled back. My voice sounded thin, reedy, like it belonged to a stranger. I'm cleaning it up. I didn't clean it up. I walked out of the office. I walked past the den with the half-set-up TV. I walked out the front door, got into my rusted Honda Civic, and drove. I drove for 2 hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt a cold, deep, profound numbness seeping into my bones. When I finally pulled over in the parking lot of a deserted strip mall, the numbness broke. I threw open the car door and vomited onto the asphalt. I retched until my stomach was empty, until my throat burned and my ribs ached. I pulled out my phone. I had 3 missed calls from Dad. 1 text from Sawyer. Dad says you bailed. Rude. We were going to order sushi. I stared at the text. Rude. It was the sheer audacity of it that brought the anger. It wasn't a hot, fiery anger. It was an absolute 0-degree freeze. They were living in a rot of their own making, and they were annoyed that I didn't stay to set up their television. I realized then that confronting them directly would be useless. Dad would deny it, or worse, he would justify it with that smooth, client-calming voice. Sawyer would twist it. She would play the victim, or she would smile that pitying smile and tell me I was crazy. But there was one person who couldn't deny it. One person whose entire existence was predicated on maintaining the illusion of perfection. Beatrice. I went to the house the next morning. It was a Monday. Dad would be at the office. Sawyer usually slept until noon. I walked in through the garage. The house smelled of roasted coffee and expensive floor wax. I found my mother in the formal dining room. She was polishing the silver. It was a tedious, outdated chore, the kind of thing wealthy women did to convince themselves they were busy. She was sitting at the head of the table, an apron over her cashmere sweater, rubbing a silver cloth over a heavily ornate gravy boat. "You're here early," she said, without looking up. "Maria doesn't come until tomorrow. If you want laundry done, you'll have to do it yourself." I pulled out a chair next to her and sat down. The wood scraped loudly against the floor. She winced. "I don't have laundry," I said. My voice was eerily calm. I had spent the entire night staring at the ceiling of my apartment, rehearsing this. Well, make yourself useful. Grab a cloth. I found Dad's old iPad yesterday, I said. Beatrice's hand stopped moving. She froze, the silver cloth pressed hard against the metal. The silence in the room stretched thin, pulling tighter and tighter until it felt like it would snap and take my head off. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the gravy boat. I waited. I waited for the gasp. I waited for the shock, the denial, the demand to know what I was talking about. Instead, she slowly resumed polishing. That iPad was supposed to be thrown away, she said. Her tone was conversational, flat, like we were discussing a burned piece of toast. The floor dropped out from under me. She knew. Of course she knew. The obsessive laundry, the separate bedrooms for the last 3 years, the way she drank herself to sleep every night, the way she never questioned Sawyer's refusal to leave. You know, I whispered. The horror of it was worse than finding the texts. The texts were a betrayal by 2 sick people. This was a systemic, family-wide cancer. You know what they're doing. Beatrice set the gravy boat down. She wiped her hands on her apron, methodically rubbing each finger. I don't know what you think you saw, Chloe, but your father is a very complex man. Complex? I laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. Mom, he's sleeping with your daughter, his daughter, my sister. It's incest. It's abuse. Keep your voice down, she hissed, finally turning to look at me. Her eyes were terrifying. They were completely devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a cornered animal that had decided to eat its own leg to survive. Sawyer is upstairs. Good, let her hear. I stood up, slamming my hands on the table. The silver rattled. How long, Mom? How long have you known? Sit down, she commanded, pointing a finger at my chair. You will sit down and you will lower your voice, or you will leave this house. I didn't sit, but I didn't yell. I read the texts. They go back 5 years, before Greg left. Beatrice flinched at Greg's name, a tiny crack in the porcelain. It started as a phase. Sawyer was very insecure. Your father, he just wanted her to feel valued. Valued? I felt like I was hallucinating. The room spun slightly. He's fucking her, Mom. And you're washing the sheets? Smack. The slap echoed through the dining room. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned. A brilliant, hot sting that brought tears to my eyes. Beatrice was standing now, breathing heavily. Her hand was trembling. You do not use that language in this house, she said, her voice shaking with repressed rage. You do not come in here and dirty this family with your filthy accusations. I slowly turned my head back to look at her. I touched my cheek. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. Beatrice gripped the edge of the table. She looked suddenly very old, very fragile. The hairspray and the cashmere weren't enough to hold her together anymore. What do you want me to do, Chloe? She whispered, her voice breaking. It was the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in a decade. Divorce him? The scandal would destroy us. It would destroy his firm. What happens to me? What happens to Sawyer? Sawyer? I spat. Sawyer is a predator just like him. They deserve to be destroyed. She is a victim, Beatrice cried out, tears finally spilling over her mascara. He groomed her. He's the one who controls everything. The money, the house, the cars. If I blow this up, we have nothing. We become a joke. A sick, twisted tabloid headline. I stared at the woman who raised me. I realized I felt absolutely nothing for her. No pity, no empathy, just a cold, clinical disgust. She had sacrificed her eldest daughter to her husband to keep her country club membership. And when her daughter leaned into the sickness, she just closed the door and turned up the thermostat. You chose the house, I said quietly. You chose the money over us. I kept this family together, Beatrice said, lifting her chin, trying to summon back her haughty facade. You have no idea the sacrifices I've made to ensure we maintain our position. You're just a child. You don't understand how the real world works. I understand enough. Then you understand that you will keep your mouth shut, she said, her tone hardening. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by steel. In 2 weeks, it is our 30th wedding anniversary. Your father is hosting a dinner. His partners will be there. The mayor will be there. You will come, you will wear a nice dress, and you will smile. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will ensure your father cuts you off completely. Good luck paying off those student loans without his help. She actually thought that mattered to me. She thought money was the leash that held everyone in place. It held her. It held Sawyer. She assumed it held me. I looked at the polished silver on the table. It gleamed perfectly in the morning light. Everything looked so pristine. I made my decision in that exact moment. I could walk away. I could leave this house, block their numbers, and never speak to them again. I could go to therapy for the next 20 years and try to forget the smell of bleach and the sight of those text messages. Or I could light the match. If Beatrice wanted a 30th anniversary dinner, she was going to get one. If she wanted the partners and the mayor to be there, even better. They wanted to play a game of keeping up appearances. I was going to change the rules. Okay, I said. I smoothed down the front of my shirt. I kept my voice perfectly even. Okay, Mom. She looked suspicious, but the relief in her eyes was obvious. She thought she had won. She thought the threat of poverty had put the cynical, rebellious daughter back in her box. I'll be at the dinner, I continued, forcing a small, tight smile. I'll even wear the green silk dress you bought me for Christmas. Beatrice let out a long breath. She picked up the silver cloth again. Good, that dress looks lovely on you. It brings out your eyes. I'll see you in 2 weeks, I said. I turned and walked out of the dining room. As I reached the front door, I heard Sawyer's footsteps on the stairs. Mom, Sawyer called out, her voice sleep-heavy and perfectly sweet. Is Dad home yet? No, sweetheart, Beatrice called back, her voice bright and cheerful. It's just me. I'm making coffee. I opened the front door, stepped out into the crisp autumn air, and let the heavy mahogany door click shut behind me. I had 14 days to prepare. 14 days to gather the evidence, secure it, and plan the presentation. I wasn't going to just tell people. As Beatrice said, my father was a complex man. He was charming. He was a liar. If I just stood up and screamed, they would call me crazy. They would drag me out. No, I needed proof. Irrefutable, undeniable, catastrophic proof, and I needed an audience. I drove home, opened my laptop, and started working. I felt more alive, more focused than I had in my entire life. I wasn't the crazy one. I wasn't the bitter younger sister. I was the demolition crew. I didn't sleep for the next 14 days. I functioned on a toxic cocktail of cold brew coffee, adrenaline, and a hardened, crystallized rage. Getting the evidence was laughably easy. That was the thing about my family's specific brand of arrogance. They believed their wealth and status made them invisible. They didn't bother with passcodes because they couldn't fathom anyone daring to look. 3 days after my confrontation with Beatrice, I texted my dad. I kept it light. Hey, still need help with that smart TV in the den? I can swing by Thursday afternoon. He replied within 2 minutes. That would be great, kiddo. Mom has a spa day. Sawyer is getting her hair done. I'll be at the office. House is empty. Code for the garage is still the same. I arrived at 1 p.m. The house was dead quiet, humming only with the low vibration of the central air conditioning. I walked straight to the den. I finished setting up the television, connecting it to the home's ultra-fast Wi-Fi network. Then I enabled the AirPlay feature. I tested it with my phone. A picture of my cat appeared on the 85-inch screen in ultra-high definition. Perfect. Next, I walked upstairs to my father's office. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, syncopated rhythm. Even though I knew the house was empty, the air felt thick with eyes. I went to the desk, yanked the bottom drawer until it popped open, and pulled out the cracked iPad. I sat in his leather chair and woke the screen. I spent 45 minutes scrolling, screenshotting, and airdropping the files to my own phone. I didn't take everything. I didn't need to. I curated a selection. I chose texts that clearly identified the timeline. I chose messages where Dad openly manipulated Greg's departure. I chose the territorial, grotesque demands he made of my sister and her willing, eager compliance. And finally, I chose 3 photos. They were undeniable. They showed their faces, the distinct wallpaper of Sawyer's childhood bedroom, the unmistakable reality of what they were. I put the iPad exactly back where I found it. I closed the drawer. When I got back to my apartment, I built a slide deck. I kept it simple. Black background, white text. No transitions, no music, just the raw, unvarnished data. I titled the file, Happy Anniversary. The hardest part wasn't the technical setup. The hardest part was surviving the psychological warfare of the next 10 days. Beatrice called me twice to discuss the menu beef Wellington and a truffle risotto. Dad texted me a link to a diamond tennis bracelet he was buying Mom, asking if I thought it was too flashy. Sawyer didn't contact me at all, which was normal. I answered every call. I replied to every text. I played the role of the slightly distant, slightly cynical, but ultimately compliant younger daughter. I compartmentalized my disgust, shoving it into a dark box in the back of my mind. I was no longer a member of this family. I was a structural engineer, examining a condemned building, quietly planting the dynamite at the load-bearing pillars. The evening of the party was unseasonably warm. I wore the green silk dress Beatrice had bought me. It clung to my frame, the fabric cool against my skin. I applied a deep red lipstick. I looked into my bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were entirely dead. I arrived at the house at 7 p.m. The driveway was packed with luxury sedans. A valet took my keys. The moment I stepped through the double mahogany doors, the noise hit me. The clinking of crystal, the low murmur of expensive conversations, the light, pretentious jazz playing from the Sonos speakers. Beatrice greeted me in the foyer. She was wearing a silver gown that cost more than my car. Her hair was swept up into a severe, immaculate twist. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "You look beautiful," she whispered, her smile brilliant and entirely fake. "Remember what we talked about?" Not a word. "Happy anniversary, Mom," I said smoothly. I gently peeled her hand off my arm. I walked into the living room. There were about 40 people there. I recognized Dad's senior partners, men with ruddy faces and expensive watches. I saw Mayor Davies standing by the fireplace, laughing loudly at a joke my father was telling. And there was Sawyer. She was wearing a backless black dress that swooped dangerously low. She was standing next to Dad, a glass of champagne in her hand. As I watched, Dad reached out and casually rested his hand on the small of her back, his thumb tracing the bare skin just above the fabric of her dress. It was right in front of everyone. It was right in the open, but nobody saw it because nobody was looking for it. They saw a proud father and his beautiful daughter. I walked to the bar, ordered a club soda with lime, and waited. Dinner was served at 8:30 p.m. in the formal dining room, which had been expanded into the den to accommodate the long-rented tables. Caterers in black uniforms moved silently, dropping plates of beef Wellington in front of the guests. I was seated near the back, perfectly positioned next to the massive smart TV I had set up 2 weeks prior. Beatrice was at one end of the long table, Asher at the other. Sawyer was seated directly to Asher's right. As the plates were cleared and the dessert wine poured, Dad stood up. He tapped his knife against his crystal goblet. The room fell silent. "If I could have everyone's attention," Dad boomed, his affable, client-soothing voice washing over the crowd. He smiled, looking down the length of the table at Beatrice. 30 years, he said, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "They say behind every successful man is a woman rolling her eyes. But behind me stands Beatrice, the pillar of this family, the architect of our beautiful home, and the mother of my 2 incredible daughters." He gestured vaguely in my direction, then turned to look at Sawyer. His eyes lingered. "Family is everything," Dad continued, raising his glass. "In a world that is constantly shifting, family is the only true north. It is loyalty, it is devotion, it is love that knows no boundaries." I pulled my phone out of my clutch under the table. I unlocked it. Beatrice actually put together a little slideshow for us, Dad said, gesturing to the blank television screen behind me. Just some photos of our travels, the girls growing up, a little trip down memory lane. Chloe, kiddo, you set this up. Can you get it started? Of course, Dad, I said. I stood up. I didn't walk to the remote, I just stood at my chair. I opened the file on my phone. I pressed the screen, mirroring icon. The TV recognized my device instantly. Just give it a second to load, I said loudly, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. The screen flashed black, then brilliant, blinding white. The first slide appeared. It wasn't a family vacation photo. It was a screenshot of an iMessage conversation. The text was blown up, easily readable from the other side of the room. Dad, I'm coming to your room. H. Make sure B is asleep. The floorboards in the hall squeak. A confused murmur rippled through the guests. A few people squinted. Chloe, what is this? Dad asked, his smile faltering slightly. Wrong file, honey. No, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. It's the right file. I swiped my thumb across my phone screen. The next slide appeared. Dad, you're not marrying Greg. I won't let him touch what's mine. H. I told him it's over. Come downstairs. The silence that fell over the dining room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum. The air was sucked out of the space. I watched the realization hit the room in waves. Mayor Davies leaned forward, his brow furrowed. One of the senior partners, a man named Richard, slowly lowered his wine glass to the table, his hand shaking. Turn that off, Beatrice hissed. She had half risen from her chair, her face drained of all color. She looked like a ghost wrapped in silver silk. Chloe, turn it off right now. I swiped again. It was a photo. I had cropped it to be slightly less graphic, but the context was completely undeniable. It was Dad. It was Sawyer, in her bed. They were looking at the camera. Clang. Someone dropped a fork. It sounded like a gunshot. Oh my God, a woman whispered from the middle of the table. Chloe, what the fuck are you doing? Sawyer screamed. It was the first time I had ever seen her lose her composure. Her perfect face was contorted in absolute panic. She looked wildly at Dad, then at the screen, then at the guests. Dad didn't scream. He didn't yell. The affable mask dissolved, revealing the cold, predatory core beneath. He started moving toward me, his heavy footsteps thudding against the hardwood floor. Give me the phone, he ordered, his voice dropping to a terrifying guttural whisper. I took 2 steps back, keeping the table between us. I swiped one more time. The final slide was a series of timestamps. 5 years of dates, 5 years of hotels, 5 years of sickness. This is the family my father built, I said, my voice remarkably steady. I looked around the room. The guests were frozen in horror. Mayor Davies was staring at his plate, looking physically ill. Richard was gripping the edge of the table, staring at my father with utter revulsion. A family built on loyalty, I continued, throwing Dad's words back at him. A love that knows no boundaries. Isn't that right, Dad? Asher lunged across the corner of the table, his hand swiping for my phone. He knocked over a crystal pitcher of water. It shattered on the floor, splashing over the shoes of a horrified caterer. I stepped back, easily, out of his reach. Asher, stop! Beatrice shrieked. She was crying now, ugly, heaving sobs that ruined her makeup. You're making a scene! Chloe, please, you're ruining everything! I'm not ruining anything, Mom, I said, looking down the length of the table at her. I'm just turning on the lights. You vindictive little bitch, Sawyer spat, tears streaming down her face. She tried to grab Dad's arm to pull him back, but he shook her off. The illusion was gone. She wasn't a goddess anymore. She was just a pathetic, broken woman standing in a mess of her own making. The presentation is over, I said to the room at large. I disconnected the airplay. The massive screen behind me went black, plunging that side of the room back into dim, ambient light. I looked at my father. He was breathing heavily, his fists clenched, standing in a puddle of spilled water and broken glass. He had lost. He knew it. The partners had seen it. The mayor had seen it. There was no spinning this. There was no client calming voice smooth enough to erase the image of him in his daughter's bed. I turned my back on him. I walked the length of the dining room. Nobody spoke to me. The guests parted like the Red Sea, pulling their chairs in, averting their eyes. I could hear the jagged, ragged sound of my mother weeping at the head of the table. I walked through the foyer, my heels clicking sharply against the marble tile. I pushed open the heavy mahogany front door and stepped out into the warm night air. I walked down the driveway, past the valet who was standing frozen, staring at the house. I got into my rusted Honda Civic. I locked the doors. I put the key in the ignition, started the engine, and drove away from the pristine beige monument to my father's success. As I turned out of the neighborhood, I rolled down the windows. For the first time in my life, I could breathe. I haven't spoken to any of them since that night. I heard Dad was forced out of his firm, and Beatrice finally filed for divorce just to protect her remaining assets. As for Sawyer, I honestly don't care. Walking away was the hardest, best thing I ever did. If my story made you feel a little less alone in your own family chaos, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs a reminder to stand up for themselves, and make sure to subscribe for more.